Listeners, prepare yourselves as we dive into the world of Amelia Foster, a successful food critic whose perfectly curated life is about to be turned upside down. Chapter 1. The Flavour of Discontent. Amelia Foster's stilettos clicked against the polished floor of the upscale Manhattan restaurant, the sound barely audible over the gentle clink of silverware and murmur of conversation. She slid into her usual corner table, nodding a greeting to the maitre d' who knew her by name. "The usual, Miss Foster?" he asked, already reaching for the wine list. "Please, Jack. And let the chef know I'm here for the new summer menu." As Jacques departed, Amelia pulled out her tablet, fingers flying over the screen as she reviewed her notes from the previous night's restaurant opening. The words blurred together. Adjectives she'd used 100 times before to describe dishes that were technically perfect, but somehow lacking. A glass of crisp Chablis appeared at her elbow, and Amelia took a sip, letting the cool liquid wash away the taste of discontent that had been lingering on her tongue for months. At 35, Amelia had achieved everything she'd set out to do when she'd left her small coastal hometown over a decade ago. Her reviews in Sava magazine could make or break a restaurant. She had a sleek apartment overlooking Central Park, a closet full of designer clothes, and reservations at every hot new eatery in the city. And yet, her phone buzzed, and Amelia glanced at the screen to see a text from her younger sister, Lily. "Mum's birthday next month. Coming home this year." Amelia's finger hovered over the screen. How many years had it been since she'd been back to Rockport? The excuses were always the same. Deadlines, important restaurant openings, can't miss industry events, can't make it. Sending a gift. She typed the response quickly, hitting send before she could second-guess herself. The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of sea scallops with a yuzu foam. Amelia raised her phone to snap a photo, then paused, lowering the device. When was the last time she'd simply enjoyed a meal without analysing every bite, without thinking about how to describe it to her readers? She forced herself to take a bite, closing her eyes to savour the flavours. It was exquisite, of course. Everything in her life was exquisite, and completely devoid of surprises. "Is everything to your liking, Miss Foster?" The chef had appeared at her table, a hopeful smile on his face. Amelia opened her eyes, pasting on the polite, slightly distant smile she'd perfected over years of professional dining. "It's lovely, Antoine. The yuzu is an interesting choice with the scallops." The chef beamed, launching into an explanation of his inspiration for the dish. Amelia nodded at appropriate intervals, but her mind was elsewhere, back on the text from her sister. When was the last time she'd eaten a simple lobster roll, fingers greasy and hair tousled by the sea breeze? When was the last time she'd laughed so hard her sides hurt, or felt the rush of diving into the cold Atlantic on a scorching summer day? "Miss Foster?" Antoine's voice broke through her reverie. "I've lost you." Amelia blinked, realising the chef had asked her a question. "I'm sorry, Antoine. It's been a long week. You were saying?" As the chef resumed his culinary monologue, Amelia's phone lit up with an email notification. Her editor's name flashed on the screen. "Amelia, need you to cover the Rockport Lobster Festival. Our usual guy is out with food poisoning. Ironic, I know. Week-long assignment leaving this weekend. It's a big event, lots of local colour. Perfect for your summer feature. Details to follow." Amelia stared at the screen, her heart racing. Rockport. Home. After all these years. "Miss Foster, are you all right? You've gone quite pale." Amelia looked up at the concerned chef, then down at the perfectly plated food before her. In that moment, the carefully constructed world she'd built for herself seemed to shift, like a sand castle at the edge of the tide. "I'm fine, Antoine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just remembered a pressing deadline." As the chef nodded sympathetically and retreated, Amelia picked up her fork, trying to focus on the task at hand. But for the first time in years, the flavour of the food on her plate was overwhelmed by the taste of something else. The salty, sweet promise of home, and the terrifying possibility of change. Chapter 2. Tides of Change. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Rockport's main street as Lucas Reeves jogged down the sidewalk, nodding greetings to shopkeepers opening for the day. His breath came in steady puffs, feet pounding a familiar rhythm on the pavement. As he rounded the corner onto the harbour front, the scent of salt and seaweed filled his lungs. Lucas slowed to a walk, taking in the sight of fishing boats bobbing gently in the quiet harbour. This view, unchanged for generations, never failed to centre him. "Morning, Luke," called a gruff voice. "Big day today, eh?" Lucas turned to see old Joe, a retired fisherman, settling onto his usual bench. "Morning, Joe." "Yeah, kick-off meeting for the lobster festival. Gonna be a busy few weeks." Joe chuckled. "You said that last year, and the year before. When are you going to learn to relax a little?" Lucas grinned, but there was a tightness around his eyes. "Maybe next year, Joe. See you around." As he jogged back home, Lucas's mind raced through his to-do list. The Lobster Festival was Rockport's biggest event of the year, and as the organiser, the weight of its success rested squarely on his shoulders. It was a responsibility he took seriously, perhaps too seriously, if his daughter's recent comments were anything to go by. The thought of Sophie sobered him. At 8 years old, she was growing up fast, her questions about her mother becoming more frequent and harder to deflect. Lucas's chest tightened, as it always did when he thought of Sarah. 5 years gone, and the loss still felt fresh some days. Lucas shook off the melancholy as he approached his house, a cosy Cape Cod with faded blue shutters. The sound of cartoons drifted through an open window, and he smiled. Sophie was up. Inside, he found his daughter at the kitchen table, a bowl of cereal in front of her, and a stuffed lobster tucked under one arm. "Morning, Soph," he said, dropping a kiss on top of her curly head. "Sleep well?" Sophie nodded, then fixed him with a serious look. "Dad, can I help with the festival this year, please?" Lucas paused in the act of pouring his coffee. "I don't know, sweetie. It's a lot of work, and you've got day camp." "But I'm old enough now," Sophie protested. "Grandma says I'm a big girl." Lucas sighed, recognising the stubborn set of Sophie's jaw, so like her mother's. "Tell you what, why don't you come to the kick-off meeting with me this morning? You can be my special assistant." Sophie's face lit up, and Lucas felt a pang. When was the last time he'd seen her this excited about something they could do together? An hour later, showered and changed, Lucas led Sophie into the community centre. The room was already buzzing with activity, local business owners and volunteers gathered in clusters. "Luke." "There you are," called Maggie, the owner of the Lighthouse Cafe. "We were just debating the music lineup." "Oh, and hello, Miss Sophie. Are you helping your dad today?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "I'm his special assistant." As the meeting got underway, Lucas found his attention divided between the festival plans and his daughter's rapt expression. He'd always seen the festival as his duty to the town, a way to boost the local economy and keep Rockport on the map. But watching Sophie's excitement, he began to see it through fresh eyes. The meeting wound down, and Lucas found himself cornered by Tom, the local bank manager. "Luke, have you given any more thought to that loan? The Crab Shack space is still available, you know. It'd be a shame to see an outsider snap it up." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. The idea of opening his own restaurant had been a dream once, shared over late-night whispers with Sarah. But after her death, he'd pushed it aside, focusing instead on raising Sophie and keeping the festival running. "I don't know, Tom. It's a big risk, and with Sophie..." "Dad?" Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Can we get ice cream?" Lucas looked down at his daughter's hopeful face, then back at Tom's encouraging smile. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. You know what, Soph? Ice cream sounds great. He turned to Tom. And Tom? Let's talk more about that loan next week. As they walked out into the bright summer day, Sophie's small hand in his, Lucas felt a shift. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to more than just getting through another day. He wanted something for himself, something that could make Sophie proud. The Lobster Festival was just weeks away, promising the usual flurry of activity and stress. But this year felt different. This year, Lucas Reeves was ready for change. Chapter 3. Butterfingers. Amelia's rental car crawled down Rockport's main street, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Each familiar storefront sent a jolt of nostalgia through her chest. Seagull's ice cream parlour, Walsh's hardware, the Lobster Trap gift shop, all exactly as she remembered, yet somehow smaller. She pulled into a parking spot in front of the Lighthouse Cafe, its cheery blue awning fluttering in the sea breeze. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, her designer heels immediately sinking into a crack between the cobblestones. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, trying to wrench her shoe free without toppling over. A passing couple shot her curious glances, and Amelia felt her cheeks burn. So much for making a dignified return. The tantalising aroma of freshly baked blueberry muffins wafted from the cafe, making her stomach growl. Food first, she decided. She could check into her B&B later. The bell above the door tinkled as Amelia entered. The cafe was buzzing with activity, every table occupied by locals and early-season tourists. She made her way to the counter, where a harried-looking woman with greying curls was calling out orders. "Be right with you, hun," the woman said without looking up. Amelia's gaze drifted to the display case, filled with an array of pastries that made her mouth water. Her eyes locked onto a tray of lobster-shaped cookies, frosted in cheery reds and whites. A memory surfaced, herself at 10 years old, helping her mother frost similar cookies for a school bake sale. Amelia Foster, is that you?" She looked up, startled, to find the older woman staring at her in disbelief. "Mrs. Maggie?" Amelia blinked, recognition dawning. "I didn't realise you still owned the cafe." Maggie beamed. "Goodness, look at you, all grown up and cityfied. What brings you back to our little corner of the world?" "I'm here to cover the Lobster Festival for Savour magazine," Amelia explained, feeling oddly self-conscious under Maggie's warm gaze. "A food writer. How wonderful. Oh, but you must try our new lobster roll. Lucas, bring out one of your special rolls for Amelia here." Amelia froze. "Lucas? As in—" But before she could finish, a deep voice called out from the kitchen, "Coming right up, Mags." Amelia's heart raced. She wasn't ready for this. Not yet. Not while she was still jet-lagged and dishevelled from her drive. She turned, intending to make a quick escape, only to collide with a solid chest. Strong hands steadied her, and she found herself looking up into a pair of familiar brown eyes. "Whoa there," Lucas said, a lopsided grin spreading across his face. "I know my lobster rolls are good, but there's no need to dive into them." Amelia opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. Lucas looked good, really good. The years had been kind to him, adding a touch of silver to his temples and laugh lines around his eyes that only enhanced his rugged appeal. She was suddenly, acutely aware of his hands still on her arms, the warmth of his touch seeping through her blouse. You, Amelia stuttered, her usual eloquence deserting her. Lucas's grin widened. "Cat got your tongue, Amy. That's not the sharp-witted girl I remember." The childhood nickname snapped Amelia back to her senses. She stepped back, out of his grasp, and smoothed her blouse. "It's Amelia now, actually, and I was just surprised to see you. Here, working in a cafe." Lucas quirked an eyebrow. "Not just working. I'm the chef here now. Part-time, anyway." "Oh." Amelia felt wrong-footed. The Lucas she remembered had dreams of opening his own 5-star restaurant in Boston. What had happened? An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the bustling sounds of the cafe. Well, Maggie's cheerful voice cut through the tension. Isn't this a lovely reunion? Lucas, why don't you take your break now and catch up with Amelia? I'm sure you two have a lot to talk about. Before either could protest, Maggie had ushered them to a small table by the window and placed a lobster roll in front of each of them. Enjoy, dears. She winked at Amelia before bustling away. Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. Some things never change. Maggie's still playing matchmaker. Amelia felt her cheeks heat up. I'm sure you're not. Relax, Amy. Sorry, Amelia, Lucas said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. I'm just teasing. Now dig in before it gets cold. I want an honest review from the big city food critic. Amelia picked up the lobster roll, painfully aware of Lucas's gaze on her. She took a bite and her eyes widened in surprise. The lobster was perfectly cooked, the seasoning subtle yet flavorful, the bun toasted to buttery perfection. This is... she began. But at that moment, a dollop of mayo escaped from the roll, landing with a splat on her crisp white blouse. Amelia stared at the stain in horror. Lucas burst out laughing. Oh, real mature, she snapped, grabbing a napkin. I'm sorry, Lucas said, not looking sorry at all. It's just... your face. You looked exactly like you did when Tommy Peterson put a worm down your back in 3rd grade. Despite herself, Amelia felt a smile tugging at her lips. You remember that? Lucas's laughter softened into a warm smile. I remember a lot of things, Amy. Their eyes met, and for a moment the years seemed to melt away. Amelia felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the lobster roll. Then Lucas cleared his throat, breaking the spell. So, how long are you in town for? A week, Amelia replied, suddenly very interested in dabbing at her blouse. For the festival? Lucas nodded. Well, as the festival organiser, I suppose we'll be seeing a lot of each other. Amelia's head snapped up. You're the organiser? Lucas grinned, a hint of pride in his voice. Guilty as charged. Think you can handle a week of my company, Miss Big City? Amelia found herself returning his smile, a spark of their old banter rekindling. I suppose I'll manage. As long as you can keep your messy lobster rolls to yourself. As they laughed together, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that this week might be more complicated and more interesting than she'd bargained for. Chapter 4. Shell-shocked. The Rockport town square bustled with activity as volunteers set up booths for the lobster festival. Amelia stood in the centre, notebook in hand, watching the organised chaos unfold around her. She jotted down notes about the quaint decorations and the palpable excitement in the air, all the while acutely aware of Lucas's presence nearby. He moved from booth to booth, directing volunteers with an easy authority that made something flutter in Amelia's chest. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on a group struggling to hang a banner. No, a little to the left, she called out, gesturing with her pen. It's crooked. The volunteers looked at her in confusion, then turned to Lucas for confirmation. He jogged over, surveying the banner with a critical eye. Actually, he said, grinning at Amelia, I think it needs to go to the right. Amelia raised an eyebrow. Seriously? It's clearly too high on the left side. Trust me, I've been doing this for years, Lucas replied, his eyes twinkling with amusement. It'll look perfect once it's secured. Fine, Amelia huffed, crossing her arms. But when it's lopsided, don't come crying to me. Lucas chuckled and turned to the volunteers. All right, folks, let's move it a smidge to the right. As the group adjusted the banner, Amelia watched with growing disbelief as it settled into perfect alignment. Lucas turned to her with a smug grin. You were saying? Amelia opened her mouth to retort, But at that moment, a gust of wind caught the unsecured corner of the banner. It flapped wildly, knocking over a stack of boxes filled with decorative seashells. The shells scattered across the square, rolling in every direction. For a moment, Amelia and Lucas stood in shocked silence. Then, catching each other's eye, they burst into laughter. "Well," Lucas managed between chuckles, "I guess neither of us can claim victory on this one." Amelia's laughter subsided into giggles. "I suppose we'd better clean this up before someone slips on a rogue scallop." They knelt side by side, gathering shells into the overturned boxes. As they worked, their hands brushed occasionally, sending little jolts of electricity through Amelia's fingers. "So," Lucas said, picking up a particularly large conch shell, "how's the big city treating you? Living the dream?" Amelia hesitated, her hand hovering over a cluster of pearlescent oyster shells. "It's good. Busy. Lots of amazing restaurants to review." Lucas nodded, his eyes on the shells he was gathering. "Sounds exciting. You always did have big plans." There was something in his tone that made Amelia look up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lucas shrugged, but she caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Hurt? Regret? Nothing. Just, you got out like you always wanted. Made a name for yourself. Amelia felt a pang of guilt. "Lucas, Hey, no need to explain." He cut her off, his easy smile back in place. But it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We all have our paths, right?" Before Amelia could respond, a small whirlwind in the form of a curly-haired girl barreled into Lucas. "Dad! Dad! Can I help? Please!" The girl bounced on her toes, eyes shining with excitement. Amelia froze, the word Dad echoing in her ears. She watched as Lucas's entire demeanour softened, his smile becoming genuine as he looked at the little girl. "Sure thing, Soph," he said, ruffling her hair. "But be careful, okay? These shells are slippery." Sophie nodded solemnly, then noticed Amelia. Her eyes widened. "Who are you?" "Sophie," Lucas admonished gently. "Remember your manners." "Sorry," Sophie said, not looking sorry at all. "I'm Sophie. Are you Dad's girlfriend?" Amelia choked on air, while Lucas turned an impressive shade of red. No, Lucas stuttered. "This is Amelia. She's an old friend. She's here to write about the festival." Sophie's face lit up. "Oh, can I be in the story? I'm Dad's special assistant." Amelia couldn't help but smile at the girl's enthusiasm. "Well, every good story needs a special assistant. Maybe you can show me around later." Sophie beamed, then turned to Lucas. "Dad, can we get ice cream after, please?" Lucas glanced at Amelia, an apology in his eyes. "Sure, kiddo. Why don't you go help Mrs. Maggie set up her booth, and we'll get ice cream when we're done here." As Sophie scampered off, an awkward silence fell between them. Amelia cleared her throat. "She seems great. How old?" "She's 8, Lucas said softly. "Her mum, my wife. She passed away 5 years ago." Amelia's heart clenched. "Lucas, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." He shrugged, but she could see the pain behind his casual gesture. "Life happens, you know. Sophie's my world now." Amelia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She thought of her sleek apartment in New York, her carefully curated life. Suddenly, it all seemed very empty. Lucas stood, dusting off his hands. "Well, I'd better go make sure Sophie isn't talking Mrs. Maggie's ear off. You're welcome to join us for ice cream if you want, for old times' sake." Amelia hesitated. She should say no. She was here to work, to maintain professional distance. But looking at Lucas's hopeful expression, she found herself nodding. "Sure," she said, surprising herself. "Ice cream sounds great." As they walked towards Siegel's ice cream parlour, Sophie chattering between them, Amelia felt a warmth spreading through her chest. It felt dangerously like coming home. But as she watched Lucas lift Sophie onto his shoulders, their laughter mingling in the salty air, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was intruding on something she had no right to be part of. This wasn't her life. She had deadlines, commitments, a career waiting for her in New York. Didn't she? Chapter 5. Tides pull apart. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting Rockport's harbour in hues of orange and pink. Amelia leaned against the weathered railing of the pier, her notebook forgotten in her hand as she watched the fishing boats return for the evening. The salty breeze tugged at her hair, carrying the laughter and chatter from the nearby lobster festival preparations. Penny for your thoughts? Amelia startled at Lucas's voice, nearly dropping her notebook into the water. He caught it deftly, a teasing smile playing on his lips as he handed it back to her. Thanks, she murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I was just thinking. Lucas leaned on the railing beside her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his aftershave mingling with the sea air. About the festival? I hope we're living up to the big city standards. Amelia smiled, despite herself. It's not the Michelin Guide, you know. But... She gestured to the view before them. This is pretty hard to beat. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the sky deepen from orange to purple. Amelia sneaked a glance at Lucas's profile, noting the way the fading light softened the lines around his eyes. She quickly looked away when he turned to her. Listen, Amy. Amelia. He corrected himself. There's going to be a bonfire on the beach tonight. Sort of a pre-festival tradition for the locals. Would you like to come? You know, for your article. Amelia hesitated. The responsible thing would be to decline, to maintain professional distance. But the hopeful look in Lucas's eyes made her resolve waver. Sure, she found herself saying, for the article. Lucas's answering smile made her heart skip a beat. An hour later, Amelia found herself on the beach, the warmth of the bonfire on her face a stark contrast to the cool sand between her toes. Lucas stood nearby, deep in conversation with some of the other organisers. She watched as he threw his head back in laughter at something one of them said, the firelight dancing across his features. He's different with you here, you know. Amelia turned to find Maggie beside her, the older woman's eyes twinkling knowingly. I'm sorry. Maggie nodded towards Lucas. I haven't seen him smile like that in years. Not since Sarah passed. Amelia's stomach twisted. Oh, I don't think... Dad! Sophie's excited voice cut through the night air. Can we roast marshmallows now? Amelia watched as Lucas scooped up his daughter, their matching grins illuminated by the firelight. The word Dad echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of the life Lucas had built here, a life she wasn't part of. As if sensing her gaze, Lucas looked up, catching her eye over Sophie's curly head. He smiled and started to make his way over, but was intercepted by an elderly couple. Amelia turned away, her chest tight. She walked down to the water's edge, letting the cool waves lap at her feet. Amelia? Lucas's voice came from behind her. Everything okay? She took a deep breath before turning to face him. Lucas, what are we doing? His brow furrowed. What do you mean? Amelia gestured vaguely between them. This. Us. The ice cream. The bonfire. It's not real, Lucas. It feels pretty real to me, he said softly, taking a step closer. Amelia took a step back, the waves swirling around her ankles. But it's not. I have a life in New York, a career. And you have Sophie, and the festival, and this whole town that depends on you. Lucas's face fell. Are you saying you don't want... I'm saying we can't, Amelia interrupted, her voice catching. We're from different worlds now, Lucas. This isn't some Hallmark movie where the big city girl falls for the small town charm and gives up everything. Lucas's jaw tightened. Is that what you think this is? Some cliché? Isn't it? Amelia challenged, ignoring the ache in her chest. We had our chance, Lucas. We made our choices. You chose to stay and I chose to leave. And now you're choosing to leave again, Lucas said, his voice low and hurt. Amelia swallowed hard. I'm choosing to be realistic. I'm here for a week, Lucas, to write an article, and then I'm going home. I see. Lucas's face closed off, the warmth in his eyes replaced by a coolness that made Amelia's heart clench. Well, don't let me keep you from your work, Miss Foster. I'm sure you have a lot of notes to compile. He turned to go, then paused. Without looking back, he said, You know, Amelia, not everything has to be a choice between two extremes. Sometimes life surprises you, if you let it. With that, he walked away, leaving Amelia standing alone in the surf. She watched as he rejoined the group around the bonfire, lifting a laughing Sophie onto his shoulders. The joyful sounds of the gathering seemed to mock her as she stood apart, the waves tugging at her feet as if trying to pull her in two directions at once. Amelia hugged herself against the sudden chill, the taste of salt on her lips from the sea spray. Or were they tears? She couldn't be sure. She had come to Rockport to write a story about a festival. Instead, she found herself caught in a narrative she didn't know how to navigate, torn between the life she had carefully constructed and the one that might have been. As the bonfire's glow faded into the distance, Amelia turned and walked slowly back to her B&B, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had done the right thing, she told herself. The smart thing. So why did it feel like she had just made the biggest mistake of her life? Chapter 6. Shells of the Past. The Lobster Festival was in full swing, the town square a riot of red and white decorations. Amelia wove through the crowd, her reporter's notebook clutched tightly in one hand, a lobster roll in the other. She paused to jot down notes about the lively atmosphere, the scent of butter and seafood heavy in the air. Her pen hovered over the page as she caught sight of Lucas across the square. He was crouched down, helping a young boy untangle a kite string. The sunlight caught his hair, bringing out hints of gold among the brown. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. Lucas looked up, as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met for a brief moment, before Amelia quickly turned away, pretending to be fascinated by a nearby craft stall. You know, dear, those shells won't bite, came an amused voice. Amelia startled, nearly knocking over a display of shell wind chimes. She turned to find an elderly woman smiling knowingly at her. I'm sorry, I was just... Amelia trailed off, realizing she had no idea what she'd been looking at. The old woman's eyes twinkled. Admiring the view, I'd say. Though I don't think you were looking at my shells. Amelia felt her cheeks heat up. I don't know what you mean. The woman hummed, clearly unconvinced. She picked up a large conch shell, its surface polished to a pearly sheen. Did you know that some cultures believe you can hear your heart's true desire in these shells? Before Amelia could respond, the woman pressed the shell into her hands. Go on, give it a listen. Feeling slightly foolish but unable to refuse, Amelia raised the shell to her ear. The ambient noise of the festival faded away, replaced by a soft rushing sound. For a moment, she could almost imagine it was whispering Lucas's name. Amelia! She jumped, nearly dropping the shell. Lucas stood before her, an uncertain smile on his face. Lucas, I was just... She gestured vaguely with the shell. Exploring the local folklore? He finished for her, his smile warming. Mrs. Callahan here is quite the expert on shell lore. The elderly woman, Mrs. Callahan, beamed. Oh, Lucas, you flatterer. I was just telling this young lady about the magic of conch shells. She winked at Amelia. Did you hear anything interesting, dear? Amelia fumbled with the shell, her cheeks burning. It was very educational. Thank you. Lucas chuckled, the sound sending a warm flutter through Amelia's chest. Well, since you're exploring local traditions, How about I show you another one? The sand sculpture contest is about to start. Amelia hesitated, remembering their tense conversation on the beach. But something in Lucas's eyes, a mix of hope and vulnerability, made her nod. Sure, I'd love to see that. For the article, of course. Of course, Lucas echoed, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. As they walked towards the beach, Amelia found herself hyper-aware of Lucas's presence beside her. Their hands brushed occasionally, sending little jolts of electricity up her arm. So, Lucas said as they reached the sand, think you remember how to build a proper sandcastle? Or has all that city living made you forget? Amelia raised an eyebrow, a competitive spark igniting in her chest. Is that a challenge, Reeves? Lucas grinned, and for a moment they were teenagers again, spending lazy summer days on this very beach. Maybe. What do you say? Partners? Amelia knew she should say no. She was here to work, to maintain professional distance. But the playful glint in Lucas's eyes broke down her resolve. You're on. They knelt in the sand, working side by side to craft their masterpiece. As they shaped towers and dug moats, their earlier tension melted away, replaced by easy banter and shared laughter. Remember that summer we tried to build a sand replica of the town? Lucas asked, carefully carving windows into their castle's keep. Amelia smiled at the memory. How could I forget? We spent weeks on it, only for a storm to wash it away the night before the contest. You were so upset, Lucas said softly. I found you here the next morning, trying to rebuild it all by yourself. Amelia's hand stilled in the sand. You brought me saltwater taffy and helped me start over. Their eyes met over the half-finished castle, the years between them seeming to melt away. Lucas reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from Amelia's cheek. Sand clung to his fingers, leaving a faint trace on her skin. For a breathless moment, Amelia thought he might kiss her. Part of her yearned for it, while another part recoiled in fear. Dad! Amelia! Look what I made! Sophie's excited voice broke the spell. They turned to see her running towards them, proudly holding up a lopsided sand sculpture. Is that a lobster, Soph? Lucas asked, his voice slightly husky. He cleared his throat. It's amazing, sweetie. Amelia watched as Lucas pulled his daughter into a hug, sand flying everywhere. The sight made her heart ache with a longing she couldn't quite name. Can I help you guys finish your castle? Sophie asked, looking between them with hopeful eyes. Of course you can, sweetheart, Lucas said, ruffling her hair. He glanced at Amelia. If that's okay with Amelia? Amelia nodded, pushing aside the conflicting emotions swirling in her chest. The more, the merrier. As they worked together to complete their sandcastle, Amelia found herself marvelling at how naturally she fit into this tableau. Lucas's steady presence, Sophie's bubbling enthusiasm, the familiar rhythms of the town she'd left behind. It all felt right in a way her life in New York never had. But as the judging time approached and locals gathered to admire their creation, reality came crashing back. This wasn't her life. She had deadlines, commitments, a career that demanded her full attention. Lucas must have sensed her withdrawal. He touched her arm gently, concern etching his features. Amelia, you okay? She forced a smile. Yeah, just thinking about my article. I should probably go interview some of the other contestants. Lucas's face fell slightly, but he nodded. Right, of course. Your work. As Amelia walked away, sand clinging to her clothes and skin, she felt torn in two directions. Behind her was the promise of something warm and real, something she'd thought she'd left behind years ago. Ahead lay the life she'd worked so hard to build, safe in its familiarity, but suddenly feeling hollow. She paused at the edge of the beach, looking back. Lucas was kneeling in the sand with Sophie, adding final touches to their castle. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, offering a small, uncertain smile. Amelia raised her hand in a half-wave, then turned away, her heart heavy in her chest. She had a job to do, a life to return to. She couldn't afford to get lost in sandcastles and what-ifs. But as she walked back into the festival crowd, the echo of Lucas's laugh and the feeling of his hand brushing hers lingered, like shells whispering secrets she was afraid to hear. Chapter 7. Tides of Change. The setting sun painted Rockport's harbour in hues of gold and pink as Amelia perched on a weathered bench, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. Her fingers hovered over the keys, the cursor blinking accusingly at the top of a blank document. She'd come here to write her article, away from the festive bustle and, if she was honest with herself, away from Lucas. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, her gaze kept drifting to a group of locals laughing around a picnic table, sharing stories over steaming plates of lobster. Their easy camaraderie made her chest ache with a longing she couldn't quite name. A notification pinged on her phone. Her editor in New York. "How's the article coming? Need that draft ASAP." Amelia's stomach clenched. She minimized the empty document and pulled up her calendar, packed with upcoming restaurant openings, deadlines and social events that suddenly felt hollow. Burning the midnight oil. Amelia started at Lucas's voice, nearly sending her laptop tumbling to the ground. He stopped it from falling, a teasing smile playing on his lips. "Thanks," she murmured, willing her heart to stop racing. "I was just trying to work on my article." Lucas glanced at the blank screen, then back at her, one eyebrow raised. "Looks like it's going well." Amelia felt her cheeks heat up. She snapped the laptop shut. "I'm just gathering my thoughts." Lucas nodded, his expression softening. He gestured to the empty space beside her. "Mind if I join you? Promise I won't disturb your very productive thought-gathering." Despite herself, Amelia felt a smile tugging at her lips. She scooted over, making room for him on the bench. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the water. Amelia was acutely aware of Lucas's presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening air. "You know," Lucas said finally, his voice soft. "I used to come here a lot. After Sarah died, it was the only place I could think clearly." Amelia turned to him, surprised by the sudden vulnerability in his tone. "Lucas, He shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "It's okay. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I know what it's like to feel stuck, to not know how to move forward." Amelia swallowed hard, her throat suddenly tight. "I'm not stuck," she insisted, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Lucas didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white disc. "Remember these? We used to collect them as kids." Amelia took the disc, turning it over in her hands. "Sand dollars. We'd spend hours looking for perfect ones." "You always said they were lucky," Lucas said, his eyes on the disc in her hands. "But if you made a wish on a whole one, it would come true." Amelia closed her fingers around the disc, feeling its delicate ridges press into her palm. "I was a romantic kid. And now?" Lucas asked softly. Amelia looked up, meeting his gaze. The intensity she saw there made her breath catch. "Now I don't know what I am." Before Lucas could respond, a small voice called out, "Dad, there you are." They turned to see Sophie running towards them, her curls bouncing with each step. She skidded to a stop in front of the bench, slightly out of breath. "Hey, sweetie," Lucas said, his face lighting up. "What's up?" "Mrs. Maggie says she needs your help with the lobster tanks," Sophie reported dutifully. She turned to Amelia, her eyes bright with excitement. "Are you coming to the lobster race tomorrow?" "I'm going to win this year, I can feel it." Amelia blinked, caught off guard by Sophie's easy inclusion of her. She'll be there, Lucas said, giving Amelia a questioning look. Right? Amelia nodded, unable to resist Sophie's hopeful expression. Wouldn't miss it. Sophie beamed, then tugged on Lucas's hand. Come on, Dad. Mrs. Maggie said it's an emergency. Lucas chuckled, standing up. He turned to Amelia, hesitating for a moment. Listen, after the race tomorrow, maybe we could grab a coffee, talk. Amelia's heart raced. She knew she should say no. But looking at Lucas, backlit by the setting sun, his eyes warm with hope, she found herself nodding. Okay, coffee. As Lucas walked away, Sophie's hand in his, Amelia felt a familiar panic rising in her chest. What was she doing? She had a life in New York, a career she'd worked hard for. She couldn't throw it all away for... what? A week of nostalgia and what-ifs. She opened her laptop again, determination setting her jaw. She had an article to write, a job to do. She couldn't let herself get distracted by sand dollars and childhood memories. But as her fingers hovered over the keys, her mind kept drifting to the warmth of Lucas's smile, the easy way Sophie had included her in their plans. She thought of her packed calendar in New York, full of commitments that suddenly felt more like obligations. Frustrated, Amelia slammed the laptop shut and stood up. She walked to the edge of the pier, gripping the railing as she stared out at the darkening horizon. Almost without thinking, she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. Hey, it's me, she said when the call connected. Listen, I need a favor. Can you push back my deadline on the festival piece? I need a little more time. As she listened to her editor's response, Amelia's hand drifted to her pocket, her fingers closing around the sand dollar Lucas had given her. For the first time since arriving in Rockport, she allowed herself to imagine a different kind of life. One with less glamour, perhaps, but filled with laughter, sandy feet, and the smell of the sea. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Ending the call, Amelia took a deep breath of salt air. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for once, she was willing to stay and find out.